Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trilokyam Sacharacharam Atpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhu Cha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vishvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we're entering into an interesting section of this chapter, which is quite long. I mean, the section isn't that quite long, but the chapter is. And what Vidyaranya is going to do is look at various schools within Hinduism, as well as some of the others. He'll look at Buddhism and look at some of the erroneous ideas that some people have. Now, this happens in Christianity as well. Christianity is in no way monolithic. What a Mormon believes is different than what a liberation theologian in the Catholic Church believes, which is different than what an Episcopalian will believe, which is different than what a Calvinist will believe. And then what various schools actually emphasize changes over history. So, for example, big deal around abortion now, especially in the Catholic and the evangelical Christian churches. But, 1,000 years ago, it wasn't a big deal. But usury was. And you never hear the Christian churches talking about usury anymore.
What's the usury?
Charging interest. Oh. You couldn't charge interest when you loaned money to another person. This is how Jews got into banking, because the Jews could charge interest to a Christian. This is something that probably hasn't occurred in India yet. But my point being, there are all sorts of different ideas. Most Protestants don't believe in the idea of purgatory. Big Catholic idea. And even Catholic dogma has changed. David, again, you may be old enough to remember limbo. Remember limbo?
Oh, yes, they do.
This is where pagan babies went, who were not old enough to be sinful, but who hadn't been baptized. So they went to limbo.
There's
They
no
couldn't
limbo
go.
anymore.
Pardon me?
There's no limbo anymore.
Limbo was done away with at the Second Vatican Council.
They
So
never
what
taught me
happened to
that in
all the
Catholic
pagan
school.
babies in limbo? Who knows? But my point is all these theological positions, kinds of philosophies, are not only the purview of Hinduism. What is the self? What is Purusha, spirit? What is Paramatman? What is Brahman? And just like the Christians, these various schools of Hinduism will justify their particular philosophical belief by quoting scripture. And in any culture, you can justify just about anything by taking pieces of scripture out of context. Now, when we started our Upanishad class on Saturday, one of the distinctions I wanted to make is the difference between what we call the karma kanda, the ritual portion of the Vedas, and the jnana kanda, the knowledge portion. That is not so clearly actually defined. Remember, it isn't, chapters 1 through 20 are Karmakanda and 21 through 25 are Yanakanda. No, the Upanishads are all intermixed. So there are lots of opinions about what is ultimate reality, what controls the universe. We're going to get a discussion of Ishvara, the Lord, the controller. And of course, what is the nature of the self? So this is a little heady, some of these things, but many of them are the same erroneous ideas that many sincere spiritual students have today. The names of the schools have changed, but the actual underlying belief systems, to a large degree, have not. So that's kind of a preface of where we're going. So with that in mind, what verse are we on tonight?
61, I believe.
Will you help us out?
Yeah. Shrotri kartum swapaksham te koshamannamyam tatha virochanasya siddhantam pramanam prati jagjije. To support their materialist views, they quote some passages from the Shruti to show the gross body is the Atman, which is the doctrine of Virochana.
So here he is talking about one particular school, the doctrine of Virochana, who says the self is the body. A very materialist kind of view. That's what the self is. And that, frankly, is the view of the vast majority of people in our materialistic West. Even the psychologists will start with an unexamined supposition that you are the body. That's what the self is. Next verse.
Jivatmani game deham pranas yatra Darshanat dehatirikta evatmed yahulokayata parehe. There are other thinkers who point out that the body dies and decays when life leaves it. They conclude that the Atman is something other than the gross body.
So there are people who then think that what the Atman is something that's contained within the body. Some of the Vedas actually earliest ones, will use the word prana to refer to ultimate reality. Later thinkers take that as a little bit more literalistic. So there's something in the body. The body's not the self, but when the body dies, something leaves it. That which is leaving the body is the self. That's another idea that a lot of people have. A lot of people think about the soul leaves the body and Christianity goes to heaven. Hinduism, you want to do specific rituals so that when the soul leaves the body, which is the person, they think it's the self, it can incarnate in an auspicious way, etc. These are not ideas that are foreign. Next verse.
Pratyakshatve nabhimatam andhir dehatirekinam gamayedindriyatmanam vachmetyadiprayogatah. There are others who think that in such expressions as, quote, I am speaking, the senses together with the intellect are seen to be distinct from the gross body, and that therefore they are the Atman.
Yes, so they misinterpret some of the teachings about the antakarana, where we say the senses function through the physical body, but they actually reside in the subtle body. So you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell in the dream. So then they think the self is like a ghost. And it has speech, hearing, etc., sensory perceptions. Those are inherent qualities of the self. This, in fact, is a very, very common viewpoint within Hindus today. Many, many people with whom I've spoken think that who they are is the transmigrating soul. That's where senses are. They know they're not the body, or at least intellectually they think that. But they have a subtle body identification. Next one.
Vagadinamindriyanam kalaha shrutishu shrutah tena chaitanyametesham atmatvam tata evahi. In the Shruti, we hear of the senses, such as speech and so forth, quarreling among themselves, which implies that they have consciousness. Therefore, some thinkers have concluded that the senses are the Atman.
Yes. So this is poetry, mystic symbolism of the senses quarreling among themselves. And so some people think the senses themselves are sentient. That's the self. Could be. Haven't heard anybody in this day and age who kind of thinks that. Next verse.
Heranya garbha pranat vam adinasve vamuchire chakshuradhya ksalopepi pranasatve tu jiviti. The followers of the school of the Hiranyagarbha hold the vital airs, pranas, to be the Atman. They point out that when the eye and other senses are inoperative, the vital airs still continue to function, keeping the man alive.
Yes. So even when our senses fail, the prana is still there. That's what keeps the person alive. The essence of what a person is prana, energy. That's not what Vedanta teaches. We talk about the prana maya kosha. It's a sheath. It's not so. Next verse.
Prano jagarti suktepi pranashaishtha yadikam shrutam kosha pranamaya samyag vistarena prapanchitah. The vital airs continue functioning even in sleep. In some Shruti passages, the vital sheath is given preeminence and dealt with in detail.
Yes. So in some Shruti passages of scripture, there's an examination of the various pranas, especially those that are making reference to pranayama, doing various exercises in the Raja Yoga tradition. And in some very early Vedic texts, prana is used to mean the self, but it's metaphor. It doesn't actually mean the energy body. These are passages of scriptures which you need a guru, someone versed in the tradition, to be able to interpret. We cannot take them literalistically. It's the same thing in Christianity. I was listening to a speech by Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House. What's your political philosophy? He says, just pick up the Bible, read the Bible. That's my political philosophy. And he does not believe in evolution. He believes that the world is 5,000-6,000 years old. Because that's his interpretation of Bible scripture. Not understanding that even in Judeo-Christian scripture, all of this is metaphor, mystic symbols. Next verse.
Mana atmeti manyanta upasana parajanaha pranasya bhokrita sprishta bhoktritvam manastatah. The people devoted to worship call the mind as Atman. They argue that the vital airs have no faculty of enjoyment, but that the mind has.
So these people who are devoted to bhakti, they posit that the mind is the self. Where you have action, reaction, evaluation, volition, all that sort of stuff. That's the self. Meaning there's a fundamental confusion between ahankara, which we usually translate as ego, and aham. Now, Vidyaranya borrows a word from Gita. The term he's going to use and has been using is kutastha. And again, this translator doesn't translate it. I think I would translate it as the immovable, the ultimately immovable, that which is always still and established. I think that's a good translation.
Mhm.
What names we use to describe it. We want to make sure that it's describing that ground of being. Now, he prepared this chapter with the prior one. Remember, the prior one was with the four Mahabhagyas. Prajnanam Brahma. Brahman is consciousness. And he took a different order than I usually do. I think he did I am Aham Brahmasmi is the next. I am Brahman. Then Tattvamasi, you are that. And the last one, I am Atma Brahman. Did I do that one already? This self is Brahman. That comprises the teaching that he says is the truth that's based in scripture, that is proven by direct experience. All these various other philosophies have a different view. Most of them, even today, still do not let go of some personal sense of self. Next verse.
Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho shruto manomaya kosha tenatmeti ritam manaha. The Shruti says that the mind is the cause of the bondage and the release of man, and it speaks of the mind sheath. Therefore, these people conclude that the mind is the Atman.
Yes. Their idea is I am bound, and therefore I need to be liberated. It's myself that gets liberated. That is not the teaching of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta says both bondage and liberation occurred in the mind, just as the scripture says. But the self is ever free. Even when I think I'm caught up in ignorance and that I'm a person and my life sucks. You hear me say this all the time. I can go out on the street and talk to some street person, drug addict. Do you exist? Yes, I exist. What's your existence? Miserable. Do you know your misery? Yes, I know my misery. They do not lack the direct experience of aham, I am, I shine. But because the mind is deluded, the mind is in the state of suffering. Listen very carefully. Maya never really occludes or covers the self. It just causes the mind to be deluded. But for those people who think they are a person who's bound and they want to be a person who's liberated. And then if they're really foolish, they think, oh, I am liberated. Let me tell everybody about it. Next verse.
Vijnanamatmameti para Ahu Shanikavadinah Yato Vijnanamulatvam Manaso Gamyate Sphutam. The Buddhists believe that the Atman consists of the momentary states of the intellect, because the intellect, endowed with the faculty of understanding, is the basis of the mind, and through it, the mind grasps matter.
So the Shunyavadins, the Scholiasts of the Void, a particular school of Buddhism, think that the subtle intellect has the inherent quality of consciousness, which is changeable and mutable. And then they posit what's called in Buddhism dependent origination. That personal sense of I is a function in the intellect, and it is inherently luminous, and objects arise with it, joy giving and misery producing. And that those are impermanent, and ultimate reality is shunya, void, zero. Now, you ask a Buddhist of that school, do you know for sure that your essential nature is zero, void, there's nothing there? Yes, I've experienced it. I've experienced the absolute disappearance of consciousness of myself. I do not doubt something disappeared. But if you know something disappeared, there had to be an existent substratum that illuminated it. Do you see that there's a phone in my hand? Yes. Do you see there's no phone in my hand? Yes. Presence, absence. In order to have an experience of the absence of something, be it the void, something had to know it. If they posit that consciousness is an inherent quality of the intellect, that's where knowing takes place, and it goes away, then what knows the void? Now, other schools of Buddhists, ones that I've come in contact with practitioners, do not posit that. They're basically saying the same thing as the Advaita Vedanta. They just use different words to describe it. Both Vedanta and Buddhism posit the fundamental unreality, illusory nature of the ego, the personal sense of self, the individuality. And we both agree. Any thoughts on this? Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Vidyaranya is wrong. Go take a Buddhist retreat. Let me know if, in fact, your essential nature doesn't exist. Next verse.
Aham vritti ridam vritti atyantam karanam dvidha vijnanam syada ham vritti idam vritti mano bhavet. The internal organ, antakarana, has two kinds of vrittis, the I consciousness and this consciousness. The first constitutes the intellect, the subject consciousness, and the second, the mind, the object consciousness.
Yes, so aham vritti, the thought of I am Jim. And the other one is otherness, chair, table, punit, also body. Yeah. But in the vijnana maya kosha, in the intellect, these two ideas arise. The Buddhists say that, but the Vedantins do too. Going on.
Aham pratyabijatvam idam vritreti idam vritte riti sputam aviditva swamatmanam bahyam vetina tu kvachit. Since without the sense of egoity, it is not possible to cognize the outer world, it is clear that the idea of egoity is the cause of the mind, and without it, the cognizance of the external world is impossible.
Yes. So the aham vritti and the phenomenal world arise together. We get the proof that this aham vritti is essential to cognize the world every night in deep sleep. Deep sleep, both aham vritti and what does he call the world? Is it tattva vritti? What is it? What's the word he uses?
He says idam vritti.
Idam vritti. This, okay. Idam vritti. Both disappear in deep sleep. They both disappear in deep sleep. So the mind is dependent upon these two vrittis. These two vrittis, in essence, we could say, are the mind. Yoga Vasishta modifies it a little bit. It would say, aham vritti, personal sense of self, idam vritti, otherness, and kartavya, struggle. Those three make up the world. And the mind. Going on.
Shane shane janmanasha avaham vrittam vrittemi tau yataha vijnanam kshanikam tena swaprakasham swatomitehe. As the I consciousness appears and disappears every moment, the intellect is transitory and it needs no further principle to illuminate.
Yes. So they say this I thought is transitory. It occurs and disappears moment to moment. The Buddhists say you need no other factor to illuminate. That's what they posit. So let's see if Vidyaranya has an answer to that.
Vijnanam ayakoshos yam jiva ityagama jaguhu sarva sansara etasya janmanasha sukhadikaha. The intellect sheath is the self. The whole world is cognized by it, and birth and death, pleasure and pain affect it. So say some Vedic texts.
So here, when the Vedic texts say that the intellectual sheath is the self and it creates the whole world, what it means, again, you have to study these Vedic texts with a teacher. We're talking about Jivatman, not Paramatman. It means the individual sense of self. What Shankara will call Chit Chaya, the reflection of consciousness caught in the web of thought. Or Vidyaranya's example, we have Akasha, the sky, reflected in the water in the jar. You jiggle the jar, the water jiggles, and the sky looks broken. There's no sky in the jar. It's the reflection of the sky in the jar. So it seems like I, Jim, am a conscious, sentient being with qualities, with will. I make choices. I do this, I don't do that. I experience this, I don't experience that. But that I is pratibimba, it's a reflected self. It's chaya, it's a shadow self. It's the reflection of consciousness. The clearest example I've used is I bring out the little hand mirror, my teaching aid, and I shine it around the room in people's faces. And the question is there a light in the mirror or not? Well, there kind of is and there kind of isn't. Certainly can make a light shining on my face, meaning I see a world. And the world I see is different than the world you see. It seems like there's a Jim who's a conscious being. But what the Yiranya is saying is, no. There is no light in the mirror. Light's there. There's the reflection of the light. Yet that reflected light can shine in a limited way. If I had two mirrors, I could have two lights. So the Jiva in Punit sees a world that's different than the Jiva Jim sees, or David or Mark. But behind that Jiva, which we see rise and fall, thicken and thin, is the real Aham. The vast empty sky of consciousness. Chidakasha, which is without qualities, without form, without taint or dirt, ever the witness of the intellect and the mind. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Vijnanam shanikam natma vidyut brahmni meshavad anyas yanupalabdhatvat shunyam madhyam ekajaguhu. The intellect is momentary, like the flashes of lightning in a cloud or the twinkling of an eye, and that because we know of no other self beyond the intellect, the self is nothing or void. So say the Madhyatmika Buddhists.
Yes. So they think the self is only this reflection of consciousness which flashes from moment to moment. And in the spaces between its flashing, nothing. And there is no ground of being which illumines it. Shunyata, empty, void. So say, and what was the name of this school of Buddhists?
Madhyamika.
Madhyamika. I usually call them the Shunyavadins, the scholiasts of the void. All right, going on.
Asa deve mityadave eva shrutam tataha jnanagnyayatmakam sarvam jagat bhranti prakalpitam. Quoting the Shruti, quote, in the beginning, all this was non-existence, asa, end quote. The Buddhists say that perception and the objects of perception are the creations of illusion.
Yes. So in the beginning, nothing existed. It's asat. So the Buddhists imply that the scripture says that. I find it interesting that there's enough Buddhists around that Vidyaranya thinks he needs to argue with them. You know, in what, 1400, something like that? I didn't think there were that many Buddhists in India at that point. But in any case, he does. And the basic point is this particular school of Buddhism posits there is no ultimate reality. There's nothing. There's nothing. Now, I had a dear friend, his name was Roger, who was a professor of religion at Duke University. He's retired. And he was a Pure Land Buddhist. And he was of this school. And he said, there is no ultimate reality. What the Buddhist experiences is different than what the Christian experiences, which is different than the Hindu, which is different than the Sufi. The only commonality is different points of practice. Nothing real. Now, the Advaita Vedantin is a perennialist who says basically human beings are the same. We've got a physical nature, we have an emotional life, we've got a thought life, we've got an ego sense. But if we stop the mind and introvert the attentive faculty and notice the knower, it is empty like the sky, but it's Purnam. It's full of being. Is birthless, changeless, deathless, Kutastha, profoundly present and immovable. Next verse.
Niradhisthana vibhrante bhavadatmano stita chunyasyapi sasakshitvat anyatha nokti rasyate. The Vedantins refute them by saying that there can be no illusion without a substratum which is not an illusion. The existence of the Atman must be admitted. Even the void has a witness. If not, it would be impossible to say, quote, there is a void.
Yes. So, two arguments here that he puts forward: an illusion, which would be the personal sense of self in the phenomenal world, must have a substratum. I'm not sure about that argument so much. I'll take his word for it. But the second one, I think, is right on. Okay, in deepest Satori, I experienced that there was nothing. Personal sense of self vanish. But it was illumined by something. Otherwise, the void could not have been known. So these scholiasts of the void, these shunyavadins, it may be a nice philosophy, but it cannot be validated by experience. To say I have experienced that I am the void implies something there. In the end, it's really only a problem of language. Get out of the school of arguing philosophy. Remember what the Buddha did. He sat still and he gave up everything to see what is. That's all we need to do. Any thoughts or questions? Next verse.
Anyo vijnanamayata anandam aya antaraha astitye vopalabdhatva iti Vaidika darshanam. The Vedic view say that the Nayayikas is that beyond the intellect sheath, there is yet another sheath, the bliss sheath. It is existing, not something that does not exist.
So again, going back to the Panchakosha, the five sheaths. So the Vedas say beyond the intellectual sheath, the Vijnanam, the Vijnanam Maya Kosha, is the bliss sheath, the Anandamaya Kosha. Let's review quickly what it is. It is the stuff of mind, the chitta, folded up into its potential state. It is also called avyakta, unmanifest. It's where all the mental impressions are not gone. They are in a seed form. There is no vikshepa shakti, no projecting power, but there is avarana shakti, veiling power. So this bliss sheath is experienced by ordinary people in two ways. The first, the most complete experience of it is deep sleep, where I illumine nothingness. I'm not unconscious. Otherwise, in the morning, I couldn't say, oh, I slept so soundly. Remember it. Classic metaphor is it's like closing your eyes. You're not blind when you close your eyes. You're seeing the back of your eyelids. Your eyelids occlude your sight of the world. But you're not blind. So you are not unconscious in deep sleep. You are aware of the nothingness of pure ignorance. We experience the Anandamaya Kosha partially every time we satisfy a desire. Desire and object of desire become one. much of the Vikshepa Shakti, the projecting power of the mind, goes away. That's why I like it when I satisfy a desire. I go get a chocolate. A little kiss of the bliss of my own self nature. But if I do not know that it's just my mind ceasing its Vikshepa Shakti, I'm still in ignorance. There's still the Avarana Shakti, the non-apprehension. I'm still spiritually asleep. And the Anandamaya Kosha will vary in intensity and duration, depending on how much we want something and how completely it satisfies that desire. So it will vary in intensity and it will vary in duration. But I illuminate. I know when the mind is happy. I know after the fact that I slept soundly. Any thoughts on this? So this is something subtler than the intellect. And I think what he's implying is the Buddhists don't talk about this.
And the reason we say it's a sheep is because there is still the Avanana Shakti, which
It's still not the self. And it's known, it's seen. It's an object of cognition. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So the bliss that experienced in like a meditation is not the bliss sheep.
Is it or isn't it? If your meditation is, oh, I, Jim, feel so peaceful. I put on the new age music and I smoke a little bit of a joint. And then I get in the vibrating chair. Oh, yeah. I'm so good. I'm meditating. And it's the Anandamaya Kosha. Or Laya, sometimes we call it that. The mind moving towards unconsciousness. That make a little clearer?
Mm-hmm.
Good question. All right. But if in meditation you're fully alert and the vrittis, the vikshepa shakti, starts to subside, and you are conscious, aware of the no thingness of the ground of being, then you're right. There's no Avarana Shakti. Next verse.
Anurmahan madhyamo vetyevam tatrapi. Anurmahan madhyamo vet evam tatrapi vadinah bahudha vivadante hi shruteryuktas samashrayat. Other philosophers, recognizing the authority of the Shruti, still dispute variously as to whether the Atman is atomic in size or all-pervasive, or something between the two.
Yes. So some of the scriptures will say the self is subtler. It's smaller than the smallest. Some people take this literalistically, and when they're talking about atomic in size, meaning your self is really teeny tiny. It's not what the scriptures mean by it. It means pervasiveness. So I think they're called neutrinos. They're so small that when they are traveling through space, they pass right through the Earth as if it weren't there. That's one way of looking at atomic in size. But the self is not like a bunch of neutrinos, smaller than the smallest. What it means, it's subtler than the subtlest. It's subtler than the gross body. It's subtler than the energy body. It's subtler than my feelings. It's subtler than my subtlest thoughts. It's even subtler than this sheet. It pervades everything. It is like space. All things occur in space. When I move the glass in space, I'm not moving space. Glass doesn't touch space. So that's the correct interpretation of this idea of it being atomic. But other people take it literalistically and they think it's really little. Going on.
Padum vadantya tyarantaralah sukshmanadeepa pracharatah romna sahasrabhagena tulyasu prachayatyayam. There are philosophers called Antaralas who hold that Atman must be atomic in size because it is said to pervade capillaries as fine as 1,000th part of a hair.
Yes. So they think the self in me is like a really refined ghost. Some Western metaphysical teachings talk about your real self has an etheric body, which is subtler and more refined, and it's perfect. It's always young, it's always beautiful, it's always happy. That's who you really are. But that's not what Vedanta teaches. You are not another body that's just subtle or even small. This is metaphor. The language of the Vedic literature is deliberately obscure. So only the initiated can understand it. What do I mean by the initiated? It doesn't mean, oh, I got a secret mantra. It means someone who themselves is a knower of Brahman, can interpret the scripture in the light of their own direct experience. Therefore can explain it to you and me. Next verse.
Ano praniya neshono sukshmat sukshmataram vritihi anutva mahushrutaya shatashodha sahasrashah. In support of their thesis, they quote many Vedic texts which describe Atman as, quote, smaller than the smallest, minuter than an atom, and more refined than the most refined.
And again, they take it literalistically. They mean the self is some sort of rarefied substance or very, very tiny. What those passages mean is consciousness pervades everything. It's simple. You've got a pot, you've got a vase, you've got a jar. Clay pervades all of them, meaning it's the material out of which it's made. You've got a nose ring, a bracelet, a necklace, all made of gold. Gold pervades them all, meaning it's the stuff out of which it's made. That's the proper interpretation of the scripture. Going on.
बालाग्र शतभागस्य शतधा कल्पितस्य च भागो जीव सविज्ञेय इति चाह पराश्रुतिः. They produce as an authority the Vedic text which says Jiva is the 100th part of the tip of a hair which has already been divided into 100 parts.
So again, they try to corporealize the self. The one that I find interesting, we actually find it in Upanishad. It's in Katha, it's in Katha Upanishad, where there's what we call an upasana, a worship practice at the very end. And it says, meditate on the self as a flame the size of your thumb in your heart. Remember that section?
Mm-hmm.
And many people think, oh, the self it's a speaker. And it's in my heart. I'm looking in my heart. I'm going to see if I see the self. Like the self's another object. But this is just a devotional practice for those whose minds are too gross to have understood the teaching of the Upanishad up to that point. But again, it takes a woman or a man of wisdom to say, that's upasana. Don't take it literally. How does the teacher know that? Because they have the direct experience themselves. If someone were to come up to you and say the body of a human is a doll, 4 foot tall, that you buy in the toy store, that's the body of a human. You are Barbie. What would you say?
It's not true.
Not true. How do you know that? Did you have to study Barbiology? You know what your body is. It's your body. It's that simple. All right, going on. Next verse.
Digambara madhyamatva ma purapada maskatam chaitanya vyapti sandrishte pranakhagra shruterapi. The Digambaras hold that Atman is of medium size because it animates the body from head to foot. They too quote the Veda. Atman, the conscious principle, pervades the body from the head to the tip of the nails.
So, yes, consciousness pervades my whole body. The proper interpretation is if my finger and thumb touch and I feel the sensation, it's because I pervade that. So you can look at it in two ways. My subtle body pervades my physical body, but I am not the subtle body. So I'm going to astral project. I'm going to get my subtle body out of the physical body and go visit my brother in Dallas. That's myself going to Dallas. No, that's just your subtle mind. So we have to understand the totality of the picture the Vedas are saying. Next verse.
Sukshmanadi pracharastu Sukshmaira vaibhavait Sthula dehasya hastabhyam Kanchuka pratimokavat. They state that Atman becomes subtle and enters into the finest capillaries as the arm of a man slip into the sleeves of a coat.
And again, it's some notion that the self is some subtle form of embodiment, like a spirit, like a ghost, that inhabits the physical body and then can leave the physical body and go hither and thither. I've never gone thither anyway. And it's a confusion of the self with some subtle body. But that's not the self. Self is like space. Going on, next verse.
Nyunadhika sharireshu praveshopi gamaihi Atma shanam bhavettena madhyamatvam vinishritam. They conclude that the Atman is of medium size, but that it is capable of adapting itself to any size. It enlarges or diminishes its size to accommodate itself to the parts of the bodies into which it enters.
Yes. So they think Atman of somebody. How tall is Steph Curry? 6'8", something like that.
Probably.
Yeah. So he's got a big Atman. Someone else, you're tiny. Queen Victoria was 5'1", 5'2", was herself 2. And then even more so, there are certain magicians who will create a subtle body and make it like a giant. And then it's small. All this are various imaginations. They are not self. Going on.
Sanshasya ghatava nasho bhavatyeva tatha sati krita nasha krita bhyaga mayoko varako bhavet. This view is not valid because if the Atman has parts, it must be perishable like a pot. In that case, there will arise the two logical fallacies, that is, the cause will not produce any effect and an effect will have no cause.
Yes. So here he's using various principles of logic. The basic point is no, you're not a subtle form of body. So the way I like to explain this, it's simple. Do you incarnate into a dream? Is there a self in you that goes inside the dreamer body and runs around in the dream? Well, it sure feels like it. I have a dream ego. I am out sailing in the sailboat. I am driving the car. I had the weird one this morning. I can't remember what I was going to pay for, but I went and opened my wallet. There was no money in my wallet and no credit cards. Still have my wallet. I hadn't been robbed. It just emptied. Very weird. Oh, that seems so real to the dreamer. But most importantly, the dream body sees. But I am not in the dream. The dream is in me. And really speaking, the dream is not really in me. Or as Krishna will say in Gita, behold my divine Maya, the support of all. So the term I like to use in the dream is mini Maya. My own little individual comes about in the same way as my waking state craziness does. In the waking state, I think I am in my waking state body, interacting with the world outside. And what Vidyaranya is saying is, no, you are not in the body. You are not a subtle form of body inhabiting the physical body. You are kutastha. You are that immovable space of consciousness. All the stuff is in you. You are not. Okay, we'll quit here. What verse are we on for next week?
86.
This is heady stuff. He's polemically going after various schools of philosophy, but you and I can unconsciously or in an unexamined way hold many of the same false ideas. So it's not irrelevant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you all.